Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Well, it is Runoff Tuesday here in the state of Georgia. There are like a collection, I want to say it's like 18 seats up for grabs in runoffs throughout the state of Georgia today. I didn't even realize until I woke up and Facebook told me I needed to go vote for an Atlanta City Council. That explains why those signs have been out a little longer. It's also Giving Tuesday. I'll spend a few minutes sharing some nonprofits that are invaluable to me and helpful to the show. And also remind you, by the way, this show is, for all intents and purposes, a nonprofit venture in and of itself. If you'd like to contribute to the Ron Show, please feel free to do so. And I'll thank you in advance. You can go to ronshowatl.com and drop a little donation. Again, I'm a full-time real estate agent, a realtor, and December is going to be a pretty good month for me, all things considered. But the show itself, very much a nonprofit venture, very much an out-of-pocket venture. And if you just want to make a one-time or sustaining donation, I am humbled and I am grateful in advance. What else do we have to talk about today? It seems like everybody is talking about the presidential pardon heard around the world. We have literally weeks to go in the Biden presidency before things take a dramatic turn, if you will. And everyone is still hand-wringing over the Hunter Biden pardon. I came out yesterday myself and said, you know what? I don't blame him. I stick to that from a human perspective, from a father-son situation, for their situation specifically. Hunter Biden is Joe Biden's last remaining living son. And he's 82 years old himself. How many days, weeks, months, years does President Joe have on this planet to spend with his family, with his loved ones? And why would he want to spend any of that time left on this earth visiting his son by talking to him through a phone or a plexiglass window at a prison? Irrespective of the guilt, Hunter Biden, guilty of misfilling out a form when applying for a gun permit and tax evasion. People don't go to prison for those two things very often. But if you're related to the President of the United States in a hyper-partisan era, well, the jackals on the other side want to see that that is the case. In Hunter's case, they want to make this more about his past business dealings, working and living and doing business in Ukraine. Not a lot of there. And how many House investigations went into trying to uncover that, taking a laptop that Hunter, in his drug-addled state, dropped off and never picked up, embarrassing him at every twist and turn, literally showing photos of him in various states of repose, you could say. All for what? Tax evasion and filling out a gun permit and not being truthful on the permit. Wow. Oh, okay. So the fact that President Joe Biden even has to pardon Hunter is interesting. That being said, there is a healthy debate being had on the left about adhering to the rule of law, adhering to the system, trusting the outcome, sticking to what the jury's decision is going to be, et cetera, and so on. There is a healthy debate. And I, for one, am man enough to say I fully understand both sides of this. And I could concede in normal times where a president who spent the entire year, every time asked, saying, nope, I'm not going to pardon my son. I could totally understand why people would today go, you were asked multiple times if you were going to do this, and you said multiple times no, definitively. And so now what has changed? Well, the outcome of the election changed. I mean, it didn't change. It happened. The outcome of the election happened, and there is a palpable fear that the incoming administration is coming in with vengeance on his mind. That was part of the sales pitch this election cycle, right? Donald Trump is out for himself. He is out for vengeance. Retribution. Retribution was used on the dais several times at Trump rallies by Donald Trump himself. So I totally get the human side of this. I totally get President Biden spending time with his family and his son among them, thinking, there's no way I'm going to leave my son's fate in the hands of perceived evil. And with so much talk of retribution, I will say this. The punditry in the last 24, 48 hours has been notable. Let's start, by the way, with Jon Stewart, who, listen, say what you will on the right about Jon Stewart and his partisanship. I fully believe Jon Stewart should be thoroughly looked at, vetted, considered for national office. Let me just leave it at that. Democrats, look at Jon Stewart. I'm dead serious. And if you don't like the fact that he's going to be tough on our side from time to time, get over it. It's necessary. It's long overdue, actually. Anyway, Jon Stewart last night on The Daily Show went in on this, but actually took the Kash Patel route. There's a lot of talk about Kash Patel as the potential new FBI director. When Chris Wray, I guess, is fired, he's not going to step down. And putting Democrats in this awkward position of, okay, rule of law, right? It's awkward. It is awkward. Anyway, here's how Jon Stewart paints the picture.
Another incredibly controversial Trump administration nominee, Kash Patel, has been nominated to head the FBI. What would be to worry about here?
Kash Patel, and I don't say this lightly, is the most dangerous nominee that we've seen yet to our democracy.
We're talking about somebody who has espoused QAnon conspiracy theories,
saying that the 2020 election was stolen.
He has no other agenda but revenge.
Somebody who says he's going to throw judges in jail. He's going to throw bureaucrats in jail. He's going to throw reporters in jail.
I didn't hear anything about comedians, so Look, none of this sounds good. And while many presidents, including Democrats, have threatened to jail reporters, it's true, they didn't do all of them. Is there any reason why Patel should be confirmed?
My name is Kash Patel, and I have written the first ever children's Russiagate book. It's called The Plot Against the King.
I did not meet with Russia in a box. I did not meet with Russia on Fox. I did not meet them in Trump Tower. I did not have a golden shower.
Oh, my God.
This nominee is going to be very controversial.
Republicans and Democrats should be examining how damaging this nomination could be to American democracy.
What's at risk is the overall rule of law in the United States.
This is a really dangerous moment for our government and for the rule of law in America.
Faith in the rule of law. Finally, Democrats have a moral perch from which they can judge without shame, hypocrisy,
that.
Or nuance.
Breaking news, President Biden has issued a pardon for his son, Hunter Biden.
Mother...
Yeah.
We were so close. But you know what? Good. Get fine. It's good. It's right. It's his right. He's an 82-year-old man. Doesn't want to spend the rest of his life visiting his son in prison. Republicans get away with this shit all the time.
Yes, politics girl, Lee McGowan on Newsnight with Abby Phillip on CNN.
We have to remember, can I just say, we have to remember that Trump's pardon list from his last administration when he was leaving office included literal bank robbers, drug dealers, embezzlers, murderers. You can go to justice.gov and see all the people that Trump...
Let me ask you this, Scott, because this is a fair point. Donald Trump pardoned Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, George Papadopoulos, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn. Joe Biden's also not the first person to pardon a family member. Hunter Biden, Charles Kushner. Donald Trump did that one too. Roger Clinton was pardoned, President Clinton's half-brother. Emily Todd Helm, Abraham Lincoln's wife's half-sister, was pardoned.
And then you have Representative Jasmine Crockett, who I featured yesterday when discussing this on Laura Coates Live. Laura asking this.
I'm eager to get your take on this because, look, I mean, you have actually congratulated President Biden. Yeah. You seem to be, at least publicly, in the minority among Democrats in the House. Why do you think you are in the minority here, and is it sincere?
And by the way, she's pointing out, this seems to be a minority view amongst Democrats that it's okay what President Joe Biden did. And I proudly stand with that minority. Nonetheless, it's still a minority, which tells you we're having an honest, substantive debate about this on our side.
First of all, it is sincere. And, you know, I can't say why my colleagues are acting the way that they are. I can say that the American people are tired of us bringing a butter knife to a real fight, a real war.
Yeah. Okay. So count me among them. I mean, I've long had issues with Democrats adhering to rules that Republicans shit on. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court is a 6-3 makeup right now, and not due to get any better, at least for the next 4 years minimum. And that is in large part due to Democrats adhering to rules and parliamentary procedure, while Republicans take McConnellish routes to usurp constitutional mores. And while I definitely don't like that the President of the United States spent the entire year telling us, no, I'm not going to pardon my son if a jury decides he's guilty, I just do. From a human perspective, I fully understand why he did what he did. And when you can't even just look at it from he pardoned his son who was found guilty. You have to also look at the crime itself, what the punishment usually is for the crime or crimes in his case, and determine, yeah, that's not going to, in anyone else's situation, lead to a prolonged prison sentence or anything more than a steep fine, which, by the way, Hunter Biden has been paying for the tax evasion, et cetera, and so on. It's not going to lead to anything except, in this case, you've got partisan jackals who are out for blood. They want to see a prominent person behind bars. And listen, I'm even hearing myself and thinking like a Republican would, oh, that's rich. You wanted Donald Trump behind bars. Actually, I never said that. I'm sure some on the left did. Trump for prison, memes, him and, prison fatigues, the orange jumpsuit, yada, yada. I'm sure that exists. But like inciting an insurrection is kind of a big deal. Checking the wrong box on a gun permit, not the same, especially when it's not a scenario where someone checked off the wrong box on a gun permit in order to buy an AK-47 to mow down a classroom full of school kids or anything like that. We could nitpick over the classified documents stuff. To me, that case was always kind of weird. Like, why did he hold on to all this stuff? And why is he so vehement about hanging on to it exactly? It's kind of murky. It's kind of quirky. And once again, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland and Jackson, the justice in this country is different for the well-off, the well-connected, than it is for you or I. Anybody else, that would have been a speedy trial. Explain yourself. Oh, you can't explain yourself? No putting, we can all be frustrated about that outcome. Like, I seriously think we should know, like, from a national security standpoint, we should know, why did a former president hang on to all of this stuff? And then you have the complication of Joe Biden having stuff in his garage as well. And so, even that can be a little messy. But the prosecution here in Georgia was completely fumbled. Thank you, Fonnie Willis and Nathan Wade, for your blooming and then dissolving relationship and then lying about it or putting off being forthright about it, muddying that and giving them an opportunity. I'll never, never, never not be in your gratitude for that. Hunter Biden was dishonest on a form for a gun permit, and he didn't pay taxes for a while. And now he's paying the price for that. Literally, fiscally paying the price tag for that. So to some, I completely understand why President Biden wants to see to it that his son avoids prison. And again, a drug addict who is clean for 4+ years now, under such intense scrutiny, is in and of itself a bit of a sentence and a penance. And the embarrassment, having your nudes splashed in House committee. I mean, thank you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for sharing that with all the world. Really. I mean, at what point do you say the man's been through enough? That is, after all, what we were hearing on the campaign trail from MAGA Republicans. The man has been through enough. Immediately after he was nearly shot, whisked by the ear, that enough is enough. Well, okay, then you have to apply that to Hunter Biden as well. Do you not? And maybe you don't. I don't know. There's a healthy debate being had on the left side of the aisle, pro and con. In fact, I've got some more funny little quips from last night's Daily Show with Jon Stewart that I want to share with you. But I'm going to take a quick break, catch my breath, and come back and discuss further. You're listening to The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or, thank you if you do this, wherever you podcast. You can call The Ron Show if you have comments you'd like to leave behind. That's fine. 404-919-2725. It'll hop right to my voicemail. I'll happily share those on the show if you leave them. If you want to know why Hunter Biden had to be a consideration for pardon by his father, look no further than James Comer, who was on, I believe this is Newsmax, Rob Schmidt tonight last night.
Part of this, and sorry to interrupt, but part of this broad pardon here means that Hunter can no longer claim the fifth. You can't claim the fifth. You can't incriminate yourself if you've been pardoned, obviously. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, do you have any plans for Hunter Biden knowing this?
Well, I look forward to talking to Attorney General Bondi about this. We still have information that we've requested that we've never received. The White House is still, to this day, obstructing rightful evidence that we should have obtained. The White House has instructed the National Archives not to turn over all those pseudonym emails, Rob. We still don't have the pseudonym emails, which we believe will show Joe Biden was communicating secretly with the shady associates that were a part of the money laundering scheme with the money from our adversaries around the world.
So that is still, I mean, there's so much nothing that they've come up with still for 4 years that James Comer still wants to keep looking for. Damn it. And I'm sorry, crocodile tears here, Representative Comer. You mean you're being obstructed? Oh, no. Where was that fervor during the Mueller investigation? I mean, one of the things that really grinds my gears is when someone from the right says, oh, the Russiagate, that was a bunch of nothing. Okay, were you not paying attention when executive privilege was used time and time again to shield people from having to testify, having to cough up evidence using executive privilege because the man was in office? Sorry. That information, that person, that stuff is off limits because, he's the president. And why are you going after him while he's the president? One more little funny nugget from Jon Stewart last night covering Biden's timing of the pardon.
Normally you drop a controversial pardon like the way you buy porn at a gas station in a flurry of other distracting purchases and pardons. Oh, yeah, what do you give me that? Breath mints there, the WD-40, the squeegee there, one of those anal magazines. Some corn nuts. Pardon for my son. The Big Dicks Like Chicks pamphlet. So why did you do it now?
As NBC News first reported, the president did decide to reverse course over the holiday weekend at his family's annual Thanksgiving getaway in Nantucket.
Thanksgiving. I knew it.
Yes, the warm and fuzzy, the family togetherness, the staring awkwardly at your son who's about to go to prison and thinking, God, I'm 82 years old and I really don't want to schlep my way to prison and have to see him through plexiglass. I get it. I totally get it. And yet at the same time, I understand the confliction on the left side of the aisle. We are going to abide by the rule of law and blah, 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 blah. I just want to caution those on the right. This is not your aha moment. This is not, the two aren't comparable. And I'll be here to call you out on it anytime you want to try and compare the two. On the left, yes, have this debate. Throw your barbs. Throw them at Joe Biden on his way out the door. He doesn't care. It's fine. At least we're having the conversation, the discussion. And I think that actually makes us look better in the end because we've got bigger fish to fry and the boat just came in.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
I think I teased yesterday that I was going to have Jen Senko on today, the documentarian behind the brainwashing of my dad, which came out back in 2016 and is as relevant, if not more so today, in the aftermath of the 2024 election, when folks who are left of center, center and left, are having this conversation about the media landscape in this country and how the game has been tilted definitively in favor of those on the right. They use that term mainstream media, and I don't think they understand what it means or fully understand what the word mainstream means when the leading news source on television in this country, the mainstream news source in this country is Fox News, definitively to the right of center. Throw on Newsmax and OANN. Those are the extremes on that flank for cable television news. But still, that is to the right, and that is the majority of TV news viewing on the cable dial. Now, I get it. We have ABC News, NBC News, CBS News. If you watch those for a half hour at night, I'm hard-pressed to find a political bent at all. Somehow, those on the right who cry foul because facts, math, data, science, logic all have a liberal bias. When facts are presented in a half-hour little time capsule each day, they look at that and go, well, that's a bias. I don't see it that way, but that's what they do. In any event, we're having this discussion about what the media landscape does to present a bias that I think a lot of folks do, presents a bias that is conservative-leaning. Well, this didn't just happen overnight. This isn't just because of Joe Rogan, who I'll remind you, was a progressive at some point in time, very much a fan of Bernie Sanders. I believe Bernie Sanders went on his podcast one time, long time ago. There's just something about going on his podcast that makes Joe Rogan a fan of you politically. Just saying, Kamala. And maybe he'd have stayed out of endorsing anybody. I don't know. We've had that conversation. But anyway, I did tease that Jen Senko was going to be on the show today. It's actually tomorrow. I've already had the conversation. It's a fantastic conversation. Cannot wait to share it with you. Let me play for you the trailer if you haven't seen this yet, and I'll give you the link to the documentary tomorrow as well. And it's on YouTube. You can find it for yourself. It's called The Brainwashing of My Dad. Here's the trailer.
In the 1960s, Jen Senko's dad never had a bad word to say about any race or people or person.
Then in the 80s, after my dad discovered talk radio during a long commute to work, he suddenly didn't like black people, poor people, gay people, feminists, Hispanics, and especially Democrats. After he discovered Fox News, they became the enemy. What happened to Dad?
Yeah, I mean, does this sound familiar to a lot of you? You'll hear the voices of Hillary Clinton and Noam Chomsky.
The great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it is this vast right-wing conspiracy, but it has not yet been fully revealed to the American public.
By the 70s and the 80s, the media had been taken over by the extreme right.
Homosexual marriage is such a threat to civilization itself.
Fox News came along.
Mass murder committed by immigrants.
God controls the climate. Come on.
and asking the question, what happened to her dad? It was really like asking what happened to our media. And in asking what happened to our media, it was really like asking what happened to our country.
So I had that interview booked. I actually already had the conversation late last week. Going to share that with you tomorrow. I just thought it was an interesting reminder. And again, this documentary came out in 2016. And in the last 8 years, what would you say has happened to the media landscape in this country since? The advent of podcasting has grown exponentially since 2016. And you have the rise of Tucker Carlson, now unshackled even from Fox News with his venture on X. And you have to mention X. You have to mention that Elon Musk has bought the Twitter X platform and has decided to thumb the scales in much the same way that Mark Zuckerberg and Jack from Twitter had been accused of thumbing the scales in the 2020 election cycle, but you're not hearing nearly as much noise about that sort of lean from the right because they benefit from it. And they don't want to make... In fact, the posit being, well, talk radio balances the scale. Fox News balances the scale. Does it? So over the weekend, I'm bebopping along, showing houses, doing my real estate thing, and got somebody under contract yesterday. Congrats, Rachel and Christian. And I'm listening to NPR, as I do, when there's not a football game on that I'm paying attention to. Falcons, what do you do this to me? You do this to me every year. Anyway, and I caught NPR's On the Media. And On the Media, it just so happens, this week's episode talks about how conservative talk radio came to dominate the airwaves. That is literally the title of their most recent episode.
On this week's On the Media, 17 of the nation's top 20 most listened to talk radio hosts are conservative. Only one is progressive. How did the public airwaves come to be so politically lopsided?
If you turn the country station on and you hear Beethoven's Fifth, you're going to be confused. Radio executives think that people feel the same way about talk.
Welcome to the Rush Limbaugh program, a program exclusively designed for rich conservatives and right-minded Republicans and those who want to be either or both.
We sold it as news from a biblical worldview, but it was funny how that biblical worldview seemed to line up with Republican Party politics.
Why would we want to have any Democrats on?
Any losers.
Yeah, I'm never going to speak.
I am a working mother.
Yeah.
And my kids are fine.
They are not. Who's raising them? You don't have them. The babysitter's got them. You ain't no mama. Get off my program, you liberal.
And then Brooke Gladstone and Michael Owinger spend about 45 minutes or so going into pretty deep detail about how the media landscape in this country, specifically talk radio, wound up looking so lopsided. It's funny. Someone that I dialogue with on occasion with regards to politics, even when I don't want to. In fact, I almost never broach the subject with him. Is a conservative radio host back from my hometown of Augusta, Georgia, Austin Rhodes. He loves to text message me at any point in time, specifically when I'm in the middle of producing my show. I don't understand why he does that. I know when he's on the air and I don't bother him. In any event, he asked a question on a Facebook post of mine. You can follow the Ron Show at Ron Show ATL on Facebook, by the way, where he wondered why the Air America, remember that? That was the venture in the early 2000s, why Air America didn't work. And On the Media has like a 45-minute explanation, an answer to why liberal talk radio never took off. Well, for the most part, by the time liberal talk radio became a gleam in someone's eye, an idea in someone's head, conservative talk radio had firmly entrenched itself on the dial. It was just impossible to find any signals worth a darn to listen to. You have to understand, from the radio landscape in the late 1970s, we went from having a majority of our radio stations on AM signals, even music back in the day. Listening to music on AM radio is not fun. But when you don't know anything else, it's like high-def television. I watch TV shows now when they replay old football games on like ESPN Classic or whatever. You watch old sporting events and you're like, how on earth did we watch this? This was hard on the eyes. And obviously there's degradation of quality. But at the same time, we didn't know any better. We thought color television was crystal clear and looked so lifelike. Oh my gosh. And then the first high-def televisions rolled out and we're like, oh my God. It's like they tapped into my brain and are televising through my eyeballs. Yes, high definition looks really good. And wait until we get like virtual reality television or whatever the 3D. There'll be that next thing, right? It was no different with radio back then. When AM radio dominated the airwaves, and then in the late 1970s, the advent of FM radio came about. Oh my gosh. It was as if, that's how good music really sounds? Incredible. So the FM dial coming to be freed up a lot of AM signals for something else. Only radio broadcasters really didn't know what that something else was going to be until they just kind of stumbled upon it. And make no mistake, there's still a fight in Washington. There's still heavy lobbying. I know this because I'm a former radio broadcaster and I still get National Association of Broadcasting emails. These are mostly funded by Cumulus Broadcasting and iHeartMedia, the big players that own all of these, I'd say pretty useless sticks, these AM sticks now. They want to keep AM radio. Get this, in 2024, they want to ensure that automakers continue putting AM radio in your car. Your car is a huge Wi-Fi hotspot now. You can literally have the internet beamed into your car. You don't need a satellite receiver anymore for Sirius XM. Remember that? Remember how that was the thing? You had to have a satellite receiver, and you don't have to have a satellite receiver for Sirius XM anymore. In fact, the Sirius XM, I think they're struggling. Like, are they going to last? They're pretty much an app now. They're a paid app, but they're an app. Much as Apple Music is now. Like, I pay, $10 a month for Apple Music? Just so I have music to work out to. I don't listen to it in the car because I don't listen to music in the car. In any event, On the Media really spends a great job explaining the advent of talk radio from a conservative bent. And when we come back, I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of that history. I think I have, actually. AM signals freeing up, broadcasters needing something to put on it, the advent of barter programming, which meant that the radio station owner didn't have to pay for a talent to do local talk in all the local markets, and the advent of one Rush Limbaugh and the copycats like him, and fast forward 40 years, and here we are. Let me give you a taste of that. First, a quick break. The Ron Show on America One Radio, progressive voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. All right, we're in the home stretch of the Tuesday Ron Show, and we're talking about how we came to have such a lopsided media landscape when it comes to political conversations in this country. And I think first, having listened to this past weekend's episode of On the Media, which discusses the rise of conservative talk radio, which, of course, fed us to Fox News eventually, and I think the podcast growth has sort of been lumped onto that as well. I think it's important to understand how we got to where we are, and it all kind of goes back to the evisceration of the Fairness Doctrine. The folks at On the Media did a really good job of explaining what the Fairness Doctrine was, how it came to be, and how conservatives came to loathe it before Ronald Reagan eventually got rid of it.
Reporter Katie Thornton picks up the story.
In 1955, after future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall had argued the case that desegregated the schools, he went on NBC to talk about it.
We do believe that this decision in itself will encourage the people to take further steps without litigation in many areas. And that's what I think is the important part about it.
But that didn't go over well with the owner of an NBC affiliate in Jackson, Mississippi, at a combination TV and radio station called WLBT.
Thurgood Marshall was on a national program, and they cut the feed, when he was on.
This is Joseph Torres, who co-wrote a book titled News for All the People, the epic story of race and the American media. And he says that instead of playing the segment, WLBT's TV station showed a slide reading, "Sorry, cable trouble from New York." And it wouldn't be the only time WLBT cut the NBC feed during coverage of the civil rights movement.
The general manager of the station was a member of the White Citizens Council, and he was a staunch segregationist.
Black folks in the Jackson, Mississippi area, which were roughly 40% of the population, were not allowed to even buy time on the station.
Mark Lloyd.
The editorials that would come out from the station manager all supported the position of the White Citizens Council, which was against integration.
Throughout the civil rights era, a small number of very influential Black hosts were broadcasting on a handful of more progressive stations. But over the years, the KKK and other racist groups ransacked, bombed, and destroyed offices, transmitters, and towers of some stations that played so-called race-mixing rock and roll or that broadcast left-wing content. And intimidation was commonplace.
The plan moved this year against radio station WBOX, whose owner invited former Arkansas Congressman Brooks Hayes to make a speech on race relations. Klansmen made hundreds of anonymous phone calls to the station sponsors. The effect was immediate. 75% of the commercials were canceled. WBOX is
on many mainstream stations, the lack of media coverage of the civil rights movement was so pervasive that leaders like Martin Luther King started explicitly calling it out in the 1960s and asking allies to help the movement get attention. And in the case of WLBT in Mississippi, a liberal-minded church group, the United Church of Christ, answered the call.
The United Church of Christ Office of Communication joined with a local Jackson, Mississippi chapter of the NAACP and sued the Federal Communications Commission and won.
The years-long legal battle eventually ended with a federal court ruling that, under the direction of a dedicated white supremacist, WLBT was not serving their local community's public interest. WLBT could stay on the air, but their license would be transferred to a nonprofit, a group made up of Black and white broadcasters. But even before the WLBT case was settled, it was sending shockwaves through the media world. Just by allowing the case to move forward, the court had set an important precedent. For the first time, members of the public could ask the FCC to investigate a broadcaster if they didn't think their station was serving the public interest or being fair. Joseph Torres.
It was monumental, right? The idea that U.S. citizens had legal standing to challenge a broadcast license.
Across the country, listeners filed hundreds of license challenges.
The broadcast industry considers this an assault on them. They'll use that language, they're being assaulted.
The stations began to understand that if they did not follow these guidelines, if they didn't follow the fairness doctrine, then local communities would challenge their licenses.
What's ironic now is we have a president-elect and a new FCC commissioner that he'd like to appoint who has openly threatened the licenses of broadcast entities that he believes doesn't treat him fairly. Not people, not a race, not a gender, not a subset of the population. Him.
Though the fairness doctrine had been on the books since 1949, it hadn't actually prevented stations from running racist, one-sided programming. But with the legal challenges of the 1960s, that started to change.
Pro-segregation forces are right that they're on the losing end of that shift.
The decline in segregationist broadcasts led many on the right to double down on an old trope.
As they're no longer seeing their viewpoints reflected in positive ways, they read that as liberal bias.
Sound familiar?
Let's make something clear. This sea change in the media wasn't because the FCC was going around and punishing stations for not adhering to the fairness doctrine or not serving the public interest. They rarely actually enforce these policies. The threat alone of citizens taking legal action was often enough to get stations to change their coverage. In fact, only one radio station ever lost its license for falling foul of the FCC's fairness and public interest guidelines.
And I feel like I would be doing those folks at On the Media an injustice if I played a whole lot more of this. Suffice to say, they spent a good deal of time on this episode, which I will include a link to in the show notes at ronshowatl.com, laying out how we went from that era of the civil rights movement and the diversification of ideology on the radio spectrum to the growing influence of Christian broadcasters on the radio dial, and then, of course, on television as well. We all know how the televangelist movement sprouted up in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s and brought us Pat Robertson, who was the son of a politician and, of course, a minister with the tools to use religion to weave in his political ideology with his religious ideology. They follow along as the rise of Rush Limbaugh, the end of the Fairness Doctrine. I believe it was 1987 under the Reagan administration, which just threw that completely off kilter and opened the door for someone like Rush to blossom. Of course, adding kerosene to the fire is the Telecom Deregulation Act in the mid-1990s. Thank you, Bill Clinton. I understand it was a compromise with Republicans, but still. So then you had fewer hands in control of more radio signals and then eventually television signals as well throughout the country. Broadcasters choosing the cheaper method of taking on radio broadcasts of programs that were offered via barter within the program, meaning airtime, commercials, meaning that broadcasters could fill their time slots with this syndicated programming at absolutely no cost. You spend no money hiring local talent, and to pay for, I use air quotes, the use of the syndicated programming, you were just airing commercials embedded in the show that they were profiting from through their own sales. And get this, I mentioned the FCC deregulation in the 1990s where ownership caps were lifted, and Clear Channel, which had a subdivision called Premier Radio Networks, which was the syndication arm of their business. Clear Channel now is iHeartMedia, by the way. They took in the Rush Limbaugh show and cleared airtime on hundreds of their own stations to air his show coast to coast. Anyway, I just thought this was an important episode of NPR's On the Media because it sort of shows, again, a 6-decade effort, not necessarily all blueprinted out, but how this all sort of came to be, how we wound up where we are, where talk radio is so overwhelmingly right-leaning and wrought us Fox News and their influence and the offspring, the OANNs and the Newsmaxes, and how we even have a Donald Trump ascending to where he is. I've said all along, Donald Trump is not the disease. He is just as much a victim of the disease as anybody else is. The things that come out of his mouth that sound as crazy as they do when they come out of your uncle's mouth at Thanksgiving, I hope you had a peaceful Thanksgiving with your uncle. The reason Donald Trump sounds no less knowledgeable than your easily duped, highly manipulated, brainwashed uncle who watches Fox News and listens to talk radio throughout the day is because Donald Trump did the very same thing. Watched a lot of cable news, listened to a lot of talk radio, easily influenced. I mean, literally, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity had access, direct access to his chief of staff while in the White House. The Sean Hannity that rode the coattails of Rush Limbaugh. The Laura Ingraham that rode the coattails of Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh on Fox News. And by the way, On the Media did go into why Air America didn't work. Again, with radio consolidation and Premier Radio Networks and Clear Channel at the time, iHeartMedia, and syndicating Rush Limbaugh all throughout the dial, there was no room left for conversation left of center. Unlike Premier Radio Networks and Clear Channel Communications, now iHeartMedia, Air America didn't own stations. They just put shows together and offered them to stations, only there were so few stations even available, and even stations that might have aired Rush Limbaugh weren't going to turn around and air Rachel Maddow because who goes to a country station to listen to hip-hop? The same thing applies to talk radio. Anyway, just all part of a bigger picture, and we'll bring this more into focus tomorrow with our guest, Jen Senko, the documentarian who brought us The Brainwashing of My Dad. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. to midnight at Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.